It was a chaotic race at Zandvoort as rain fell on the first lap to change the strategy of the drivers and create drama in the opening stint. There was then a mixed up order for the rest of the afternoon as the faster drivers tried to work their way back up into the points before rain arrived again. There's a lot to talk about from the race that saw F1's return after the summer break, so here's my 5 things we learned from the Dutch Grand Prix. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. A chaotic race, but Verstappen matched the record. Verstappen comfortably won his home Grand Prix once again as he controlled the majority of the race from the front. It was an impressive drive in difficult changeable conditions at the Zandvoort circuit as he and Red Bull once again found a way to get to the top step. As a result of this, Verstappen has matched Vettel's 9 race win streak, a record that many have said would unlikely to ever be beaten. But that shows the dominance of Verstappen this year as he's comfortably beaten every driver on the grid and has dominated his teammates in 2023. Red Bull did give preference to Verstappen on the pit stops back onto the soft tyres, but this was reportedly due to the fact that Alonso was in range of the Dutchman. And, in my opinion, it was inevitable that the Dutchman would win this race given his pace advantage and how strong he's been this year generally. From there, Verstappen's lead on the rest of the field meant he had an advantage when the rain came once again. His lead was large enough that he could give it another lap before changing onto intermediate tyres. This was a great race from the Dutchman and a fitting way to match Vettel's consecutive race win record. Even at the restart, Verstappen managed to build a 3.7 second lead from Fernando Alonso at the end of the race, which looked very comfortable. It's difficult to see this race win streak coming to an end anytime soon. It seems inevitable that Verstappen will continue to dominate going into the Italian Grand Prix next weekend, so I think we may see the record beaten and then some as we see Verstappen's dominance continue. So it's clearly a purple box for Verstappen's performance today. He managed the conditions well all weekend and still comfortably came out on top. A fascinating strategy triggered by another wet race. The opening laps of the Dutch Grand Prix were some of the most interesting of the 2023 season so far. After the formation lap, the rain started to fall, and many drivers even struggled off the line. This was a sign that there was moisture in the air and the drivers struggled to get heat into the tyres to get a good launch. The following spell of rain resulted in some drivers gambling on intermediate tyres after just the opening lap, and then finding themselves carving their way through the field and coming out at the front. The other drivers soon followed them in with different approaches from different teams and drivers. A few didn't even stop at all and tried to stay on the soft tyres through the wet conditions, which was a bold move and one that was unlikely to work given how wet the circuit was. In my view, that strategy only worked for a single driver, but we'll touch on him later. Of course, given the rain was short, it didn't take long before the dry tyres were the optimum once again, and so there was another phase after just 10 or 15 laps where most drivers had to come back to the pits. This phase of the race resulted in a completely mixed up order. You had drivers like Zhou Guanyu fighting in the top 10, and several drivers from top teams outside of the points, including both McLarens, both Mercedes, and Charles Leclerc. The chaotic start to the race resulted in an interesting Grand Prix for the rest of the afternoon, with faster cars making their way back up the order. There was a risk that this race could have been a standard one-stop race, as Albon proved by running for more than 40 laps on the soft tyres in his opening stint. It would have been a straightforward race this weekend, and this would have created what could have been a boring race in the dry. However, the rain made this Grand Prix particularly interesting, even if it would have been nice to see a dry race once again at some point soon. The rain towards the end of the Grand Prix was so heavy that it caused significant danger for the drivers. At least 5 aquaplaned off into turn 1 at various points, which was really dangerous, and I would argue that the FIA took a bit too long to bring out the red flag, given many drivers made the same error there. However, once the red flag did come out, it gave us a final restart which was a thrilling end to a very dramatic Grand Prix. So for me, the strategic element of this race really improved the racing this weekend, which was a much needed exciting race to see the sport come back after the summer break. So the strategic element of this race definitely deserves a green box from me. Before we take a look at the return to the podium for Aston Martin and Alonso, I want to take a moment to ask you to subscribe to Behind the Drive. The majority of you watching haven't yet subscribed to the channel, so if you haven't yet already, make sure you hit subscribe today. Aston Martin seemed to have progressed through the summer. Aston Martin ended the first half of the season with some disappointing performances, but they found themselves back on the podium for the first time since the Canadian Grand Prix this weekend. The team admitted that they'd taken their development in the wrong direction this season and they'd not been quite so competitive in those last races before the break. But with the break, they had the opportunity to bring new parts to get themselves back on track and progress up the order. This weekend, Alonso managed to qualify P5, which was a good showing from the Spaniard, and a sign of improvement. Alonso very quickly progressed up to the third position, overtaking both George Russell and Alex Albon, and from there he managed to be on the right tyres at the right time to hold on to the podium spots throughout the rest of the race. Alonso is always strong in changeable conditions anyway, but he and the Aston Martin team managed the strategy very well. Even when he was overtaken by Sainz through the pit stops, he calmly took the position back on the fresher tyres. It was a brilliant race for Alonso, and it shows that the Aston Martin car is getting back into the place it occupied throughout the year so far. Alonso was fortunate to overtake Perez as the Mexican driver went into the pits, but from there, on the restart, he was comfortable. He had the pace to ensure he could hold on to second position on the podium, which is a great result for him and the team, and a sign that they will be coming out swinging for the rest of the year in the fight for second in the Constructors' Championship. Lance Stroll, meanwhile, did have a difficult race and was near the back of the Grand Prix through the afternoon, which was disappointing to see. It seemed like Stroll didn't have the confidence that Alonso did once again, and he clearly made strategic errors in that opening wet stint which put him out of position. On the whole though, Aston Martin have found their way back to the front, and the fight between them and the likes of McLaren, Mercedes and Ferrari will be thrilling to watch through the rest of the season. So it's a green box for Aston Martin for their progress and their return to the podium finishing positions. Williams shows great progression. Williams made up one of the 6 teams that qualified in the top 6 on Saturday, which showed signs of their raw pace and the ability of Albon in particular in the changeable conditions. One of the key factors in the Thai driver's route to 4th on the grid was his confidence in the car, and this is great to see. The Williams team has made some of the most progress of any team on the grid this season, which is a huge sign of progression under their new era with James Vowles at the helm. Albon's performance to finish 4th in qualifying was one of the best this season. It was a shame for Albon that the race was so chaotic, as for once he started in an excellent position. Albon was one of the drivers that stuck with the dry tyres throughout, and he was the only one who made it work, as he did one of the long stints on the opening tyre to make it work for him. This was an impressive drive once again, and Albon is certainly becoming known for his tyre management abilities. In addition, Albon managed to make the medium tyre work as well, which was something that many other drivers seemed to struggle with. It was a brilliant race for Albon and Williams though, as with the restart at the end, Albon held on to 8th position for another 4 points for the Williams team. It means that the team has scored 14 of their 15 points in the last 6 rounds. I think it will be good to see how Williams continue this, and it seems likely that the Grove-based team will be the most likely to break out of the bottom 4 teams going into next year. Sargent's route to Q3 was impressive, even if he was unable to compete a competitive lap time in Q3 following his crash. It's a sign that either the American driver is starting to learn from his faster teammate, or the car itself is improving rapidly through the 2023 season. It was a shame that he had a reported failure during the race, even if he was way down the order. It feels like this weekend will be one of what could have been for the American driver, but there were good signs for the rest of the season for the driver as he gains confidence in his car. Overall, Williams absolutely deserve another green box for their performance this weekend in the changeable conditions. Pierre Gasly secures big points for Alpine. Pierre Gasly is in a good run of form at the moment. He took 3rd in the sprint race in Belgium, and he's now followed that performance up with a 3rd place finish this weekend and his first podium for Alpine. It was a great drive from 12th on the grid to 3rd at the finish, as he got the strategy right through the early part of the race to ensure he would emerge in the front running spots. He was actually one of the drivers that was briefly ahead of Verstappen after stopping on lap 1, and his gamble paid off. This result meant that both Alpine drivers have taken a podium finish this year, and Gasly is now even ahead of Ocon in the drivers' standings. The gap to McLaren remains significant in the Constructors' Championship, but it's a good result for Alpine as they continue to try and establish what the future looks like for that team, with them currently not having a team principal. Either way, the race conditions this weekend enabled the drivers to take advantage of the chaotic race, and it was Pierre Gasly once again who was there fighting in those conditions for some of the top spots in the race. This is something that Gasly is very good at, and it's great to see that his abilities he showed in AlphaTauri have returned in the Alpine setup. He seems really settled into his new team, and now he's taken a step onto the podium as well. I expect his confidence will be through the roof at this point, so it's got to be a green box for Pierre Gasly's first podium in the Alpine. Honourable mentions. Liam Lawson made his F1 debut unexpectedly this weekend. He didn't even know he was running in the race until Saturday morning with Ricciardo's injury. From there, he had a practice session and qualifying in wet conditions, which must have been a challenge on his debut weekend. He then had basically a long practice session in the race, where he made some great moves, including an overtake on Charles Leclerc. He ended 13th, but realistically he'll be looking at Monza next weekend as his main opportunity, as he'll have the full weekend of running, but it was great to see Lawson get the opportunity to get behind the wheel and race for the first time in Formula 1. Whenever there's a strategic race, there have to be some teams and drivers that make errors. Ferrari struggled once again this weekend, and particularly with Charles Leclerc. They had a blundered pit stop, which was reportedly due to the fact that the Monegasque driver came into the pits without confirming with his team, and it's silly errors like this, as well as incidents like his crash in qualifying, that meant Leclerc had a woeful weekend. Lewis Hamilton ended up 5th in the chaotic race and could have been 4th given he was faster than Sainz at the end. It was a good recovery from his starting position of 13th. It was a good sign that the Mercedes car was fast this weekend, and they did well, but they didn't quite get the strategy perfect with either Hamilton or Russell this weekend, particularly with that rain at the start. So it was a record equalling weekend for Verstappen as he continues to show his dominance after the summer break. But let me know what I missed from this weekend's action in the comments.